Hey community, in today's podcast episode, Matt sits down with the new director of Loop Gospel, Otto Price. Otto is a Grammy Award-winning producer, the former bass player for DC Talk, and artist advocate. We're so excited to have him as part of our team, so enjoy the interview, get to know him, and hear his story.
What's up, Loop community, and welcome to this week's edition of Loop Live. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm the founder of loopcommunity.com, and today I've got a very special guest with me. I've got Otto Price, and he is the new director of Loop Gospel, and I wanted to introduce him to you today and hear a little bit more about his background and his story. So if you've got any questions, comments, type them down into the chat wherever you're watching this video from, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, and I'm looking forward to talking with Otto Price. Let's do it. Mr. Otto.
Hello, sir.
What's up, man?
How you doing, man?
Dude, good to see you again.
Great to see you.
You are a legend, and I am just so excited to have you on board on the Loop Community team to head up the Loop Community Gospel division. And you've just got a ton of experience. You have a ton of relationships and connections and just history. Like you've been in the industry for a long time. You've been doing music. You're passionate about music. And it's just awesome. And so I've enjoyed just kind of hanging out and talking with you the past couple of weeks. And I thought it'd be cool to just introduce you to the community and maybe give you the floor and just share a little bit about, let's just start with your background. Like, what's your story? How'd you get started into music?
Yeah. Oftentimes if I share, I kind of breeze through. So if I breeze through an area, Matt, you want me to kind of nestle in on just pause me. But the quick story is, I'll try to do quick. Yeah. Yeah. My dad, I was telling my wife this a couple nights ago. I didn't really grow up in a real big musical family. I kind of grew up my dad was in the Air Force, and we traveled a lot. But even though it wasn't a real big musical family, music was a huge part of our life. And so my dad is from places near Yazoo City, Mississippi, and he grew up in Monticello. So a lot of blues music. I grew up with a lot of blues in the house, a lot of jazz, a lot of the Beatles, everything. So for me, music was, even though we didn't play instruments growing up, it was always a part of the fabric of our life. Later on, I felt like it really was a God-given gift because I started to play instruments, self-taught. And so I did a lot of that growing up, but was really more of an athlete, playing baseball and other sports. And so right around 20-ish, I kind of really felt more of a calling to kind of serve at my local church, and the need there really was through music. And so if it had been, we would have different conversation if they didn't need a music guy at the time in their youth department. And so I started just playing my church, learning instruments, and I joked around like, oh, it couldn't be that hard to play piano. I just kind of figured the notes out and kind of figured the chords out, and did that for a couple of years. And then about a year later, I had a friend, I was like 22, a year later, a friend said, there's this artist in Nashville looking for a bass player. Her name's Kim Boyce, and I came and auditioned for it. And she said, you're not that good of a musician, but we like you. So we'll give you a chance to learn the songs. So I did that for a little bit, and then I thought I was going to go back home to Atlanta, and that's where my dad retired, and thought I would just, work at a church or do something in Atlanta. Then 6 months into working with her, I received a call. Back in the day, we actually received calls. On a phone. It was actually on my roommate, he had a voicemail. It was the manager for DC Talk, and told seen me play to Mac. Had seen me play for before DC Talk at an event we did, and he wanted me to come on board and be his bass player and then subsequently music director for DC Talk. So I toured with them for the New Thing record, Free at Last. I'm counting. New Thing, Free at Last, Jesus Freak, and then Supernatural.
So let's pause there. How did you go from not being good enough to all of a sudden getting a call to play with DC Talk?
Yeah, I think it's the athletic side for me that kind of paid itself off. I remember telling my coaches, I may not be the best, but I'll work the hardest. And it was that work ethic that my dad had that really helped. And so what I learned with DC Talk was there were certain in that group for their music. It was very multifaceted. You know, it's hip hop, it was rock, it was soulful, it would be everything in between. And so I just learned to become a chameleon and kind of learn the music and learn how to serve the music. And then I can talk about this a little later, but as a producer, I figured out there's three kind of producers this is Otto. There's what an artist producer, and they're all good, but like a guy like a Pharrell or Timberland, no matter what you bring him to do, it's going to sound like Pharrell or Timberland. And the second is kind of a documentarian. And so a good friend of mine, Jakir King, he produces Kings of Leon and just groups like that. So he's really just capturing who those bands are. He's not trying to change much of who they are. Or Norah Jones. And so you can look to a Norah Jones record and it sounds very much like Norah Jones or Kings of Leon. And then the third is what I would call more of a chameleon producer. It's like Rick Rubin. And these are the guys I really loved. So Rick could produce Johnny Cash. He could go produce Jay-Z. And he could produce, all these different rock bands in the same year. And so that's what I kind of learned to grow. So that's really how it came up. I really learned to do DC Talk music. And then I was kind of it was really like going to school because I learned all of how to play like a hip hop bass player, how to play like a rock bass player. We would do songs that some people would say that Jesus Freak sounds a little bit like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. So I learned how to play like, a little bit more of that grunge thing. So that's kind of how I kind of learned how to do that with them.
What was the first album you played for them? Was that Jesus Freak?
First album was Jesus Freak, yeah.
Jesus Freak, yeah. That was like the Jesus Freak tour?
Yeah.
That's awesome. What's your favorite song from that album?
Oh, wow. Yeah, so the favorite song, obviously Jesus Freak was crazy because this is, and Toby knows this, this is kind of a Loop community exclusive. The bridge on Jesus Freak I wrote. So
really,
didn't have all that. It was like in the key of E. It was F sharp to C. Just really weird. I thought they would take it out because when we recorded it, Toby and I would do demos of the songs before he would take it to his producer Mark Heimerman. And so we were at Fanatic Studio recording that demo, and he just had the rap part, and I think Tate's first verse, and that was it. And it was just that, like 4-bar phrase of that was all they had. And then we had a loop just kind of running, and I thought, what if you just put like a little? There's not a guitar, because I knew playing their music, they wanted musical sections. I said, well, what if you just add a little part here? And so I added that little section. So that was fun to play. That probably was it always is a fun song to play because it sort of, if we play it now, it still rips the roof off with people. So
yeah, that's epic. Answer this for me.
The juxtaposition of being Mr. Freak.
Yeah. So answer this for me. Who is Mrs. Morgan? Do you know that?
Mrs. Morgan is a lady. Sadly, she passed away.
Really? So who is she?
Yeah. She was the next door neighbor at the studio. So we had like we bought an old house to record in for Goatee Records. And so he would use that kind of as his demo studio for DC Talk.
Okay.
And so it was a 2-bedroom house, and next door to that was Mrs. Morgan. So she was just a neighbor.
That's so awesome. It's like, hey, come over here and talk into this microphone.
Yep.
So you toured with them for how many years? You toured with them for how many years?
9 years.
9 years. Wow. And I'm sure I saw you on one of those tours. I used to be a huge fan. you guys and Audio Adrenaline. I remember seeing you guys at like what were those events? Acquire the Fire, the youth events.
Yes.
So, and then after DC Talk, was that Sonic Flood, or when did Sonic Flood come into the picture?
Yeah, so Sonic Flood was Sonic Flood. The full story was there. The touring band of DC Talk was the drummer was Rick May. Rick May is actually the front of house now for not Casting Crowns. He's front of house for forgot. Just my mind just froze. For Bart, I can only imagine for
Mercy Me.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So Bart. Rick May is our drummer. Mark Townsend was our guitar player. Mark produced Reliant K and those groups. And then Jason Halbert is now the music director for Kelly Clarkson. And so he's played keys and I played bass. So we were the touring band for DC Talk, and we had a band called Zilch. And so while we were touring, we would do worship events. We would do like Billy Graham events or pre-Billy Graham crusade events. And they said, could you guys do your songs, but could you also do some worship songs? So as we started to do that, incorporating worship into it, the people were like, man, we love the worship so much better than your original songs. So we started doing that, which is great to an artist. They love to hear that. And so,
can you play someone else's songs? We love that way better when you play the other guy's songs. Maybe leave your songs out of the set list.
We like Matt Redman better than Otto. So
right. Yeah.
Which I do too. But so at that time we were all sort of still focused on DC Talk and other side projects that Zilch sort of took a back burner. And so Mark went to go do K, which obviously did great. And so then we looked for a new singer, and that's when we got Jeff Dio. And as we were still doing Zilch music, we were doing the worship, and then the worship songs, it was supposed to be an EP. It wound up being a full album, and that's really how it happened. There was no grand plan of let's be the godfathers of modern worship. It was just like, hey, let's just record some work. Because at that time, really, Delirious was the only group doing worship at that level.
Wow, that's wild. And a lot has changed since then. Isn't that wild? So
yes.
So what have you been doing in the past like decade, like the past 5 to 10 years? What's been like on your plate?
Yeah. So after I did the DC Talk thing, I semi-retired when I was like 27 or something, at the old age of 27. And then, I was actually 30, 31. And then right around then, I started producing a lot. And production took off. And I started working with a lot of groups. Barlow Girl was probably the one that kind of got some really big attention with labels. And then Warner Brothers brought me in to run the A&R for Warner Brothers. Did that for about 9 years, 8 or 9 years. Left that to kind of work with churches and to kind of help bridge the gap of a lot of churches at the time, kind of like what we're doing with Loop Community. They can see an artist, they can see a Hillsong United, but the chasm between Hillsong United is so far. I really felt like, man, if we could just bridge, shore that up to go, okay, they got all these incredible tools that most churches don't have access to. And so for the last 5 years, I've consulted, but I've also worked at churches to help kind of their worship teams and worship groups become a little bit more, using a record company term, more commercially viable. So when and the reality is that most churches now post COVID, they're not just a on-site presence; they're an online presence. So how they look, how they sound is measured and compared to what's happening from Elevation, what's happening from other resources like that. And so to help them to raise the water level is what I've been doing these last few years, or trying to.
Yeah, that actually is a very interesting thought. in that the way that people experience Hillsong is typically online, watching a video, because we're not all in Sydney actually watching Hillsong live in person. But for a long time, most churches, the only way you would ever experience them is by actually attending them in person. And then COVID happens and all these churches go online, which is where Hillsong would be. And now you kind of are, in a way, comparing, like your exposure has grown so much. So many more people are actually seeing your church than ever would have before, because they wouldn't have been there in person. And so they are almost kind of comparing like a Hillsong service versus, Trinity, Riverside Church of Oklahoma City or whatever.
Right.
When you never would have done that before. And so a lot of churches have had to step up their game to make the presentation, just a little bit more professional, more interesting, more high quality. That's really interesting, Otto. I've never actually thought about it in that way, that it's actually you're kind of, for the first time, churches are actually being directly compared to each other, but on an almost unfair scale, same medium, but an unfair scale, because a church of 200 people is not going to do a production like Hillsong United,
No, it reminds me of, we were actually in the process of doing some renovation to our home, but I had done a renovation. Anybody who's ever done a renovation will relate to this story. I remember, this is like 15 years ago, I did a major renovation in my kitchen, and before then, I felt like I was a decent cook. But when your kitchen is down for 3 months and you're cooking in a microwave in your dining room, and you're watching a lot of Food Network, and then you start to see, and my kids were watching it, and all of a sudden we came out of that experience, and then we had our kitchen back. Their palate had increased because we've gone out to eat a lot more. They've also started to see, they're introduced to ancho chilies and different things that were just high level quality cooking, and how to prepare a proper omelet. And before, they're just making eggs, and now they're going, no, Dad, I need to do this. And so their quality level of what they're cooking was raised up because they were exposed to something that they weren't to before. And I feel like that's what's happening right now. Is churches were forced to, for a 3-month period, raise the bar, because they were forced to, just can't, people were coming to your service. So when they were seeing online, they need better cameras. They're going to need tighter shots. They're going to have to make sure that the sound quality is better. Everything's got to be better. And why? Because the person who's looking online doesn't know the difference between the church you mentioned, or Wick Street Baptist Church versus Passion City or versus North Point. North Point online, they want that same experience.
Right. And if you're attending church online, people are just going to go to, they're going to decide. They're like, hey, you know what? Actually, if I'm just going to be attending church online, I might as well just watch Hillsong in Sydney. It sounds better,
right?
Looks better. And so you definitely do have to raise the bar a bit, because it's not the same as being in person. What would you say is the biggest, what do you think was the hardest hurdle for churches to actually raise the bar online?
I think it was, I think to me it was, I call it this, I think in analogies too. People will find that. I think in analogies and movies. But I feel like there were 3 models. Before COVID hit, Model A was on site. That's all that mattered. And for about and then during COVID in 2020, there was probably a legit 6-month period, 3 to 6 month period, where we were in the Model B, which was online only. Unless there were certain churches, most 99% of churches were, church experiences were online. And then we're in a Model C. And so in my opinion, we're going to be, from now till Jesus comes back, in a Model C. and that is both online and on site. And it's not a bad thing. I would compare it to, I'm a big Apple fan. I would compare it to the Apple Store experience, the physical store experience, and the Apple Store experience you have online. Both mirror each other and both work with each other, but it's a different experience, but at the same time, there's a lot of cohesion in it. So I think a lot of churches, because I worked with a lot of pastors, and sadly, I mean, I'm a faith guy too. I believe that God can do a lot, but sometimes it would be bury your head in the sand. Like, we're going to get past this COVID thing and we'll move on. But realize, one of my good friends is at a big mega church on the East Coast, and he was saying that their church is actually thriving more now with the online presence. And so the churches that adapt that and adopt that and adapt that into their ecosystem are the ones that are going to thrive in the future.
So we're kind of taking this conversation in a different direction than I thought we would, but this is an interesting topic because I actually recently have been kind of thinking about that. And I almost want to challenge the idea of online church because my wife and I attended online church for probably 5 months, I think, during COVID. And then we just stopped watching it. We're like, we just stopped. And then we weren't going to church at all. And then when we started going back to church, like in person, it's so much better than watching online, like a million times better. And you actually are building community and relationships. Like, you're not just like sitting on your couch alone watching it.
Yep.
And what I wonder is, you hear the argument from churches who will say, well, we're online because now we're reaching more people than ever. Mm-hmm. And I guess what I wonder is, like, I wonder how, for lack of a better word, true that actually is. Like, are you reaching brand new people that actually stick, and are you growing them as disciples? Or is your online service really just enabling people in your church to not come to church and participate in the church and just sit at home and watch it? It's a matter of convenience. And I think it is a nice thing to have, but I do wonder, like, are the pros of an online church service actually outweighing the negatives? And I hate to be a Debbie Downer here, and we are in 2022 and we're streaming services, and that's cool. But I guess I wonder, like, really, how should churches keep doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I love this conversation. Like, my wife and I were talking about this last week. Like, I told her that I need a community. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a man. We need to be in a church, and that means hugging people. It's inhumane to not hug, and it's inhumane to not have eye contact. We're not wired to do virtual life. I would say that I think the churches that do the online side, if it was one of two things. I think it should whet the appetite for the on-site experience, as opposed to being what's the right word I'm looking for? It should not be
a complete substitute.
It should not substitute the on-site experience. So it's like, anybody who's married or dating, man, texting is awesome. FaceTime is awesome. FaceTime, air quotes, is awesome. But to pick your significant other up and, and look across the table, whether it's Chick-fil-A or and Chris, it's a different experience.
Yeah, and that's totally true.
Yeah, so I would say this, the online, when I say the online is going to be part of our future, I think we need to now repurpose it. As opposed to making it a substitute, we should make it more of like most services are like, what, an hour and 15, hour and 30. Man, I think an online thing should probably be 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. Almost like a TED Talk. Enough to kind of whet your appetite, maybe a song, and like, I would call them like little vignettes, and then kind of whet your appetite, and then go, and then it gives you something to go, wow, I want to be in that community.
Yeah, right. And it can be a great tool too for, like, if you're out of town and you miss church, a great way to be able to watch it. But I've heard of some churches even just like turning off their live stream completely and being like, hey, get back to church. Like, get off your couch, come to church. We're we're not even like streaming this anymore for you.
Right.
You could rewatch the sermon or listen to the sermon on our podcast, but you're not going to watch the whole service. Like, you're not going to be able to get everything you would be able to get if you came in person. And then, people say, well, yeah, but our online service is bringing in a lot of new people. And I would just say, like, is it real? Like, I don't know. I wonder, is it really how many new people is it really bringing in that you wouldn't have brought in on your own? I'm not sure.
Right.
And I'm sure churches have data on that.
Yeah, they do. And I think there are, I'm not in that world, so I don't want to speak. I try to stay out of things I'm not intelligent about. But I would say, I think just purely as a human, the idea of singing a song, hearing other people singing around you.
Yeah.
This is the reason why we went to go see a couple of movies in the theater. This is why I like going to the theater. I mean, I like having certain movies, on access on demand. But man, there's something about going to a theater, getting that popcorn, getting your seat, hearing the laughter around you. That's very human. And so I think we lose that humanity. It's a similar thing. And even more so because now it's a spiritual. Jesus said, with two more gathered, there's something else that happens.
Yeah, man. It's funny. I actually just went to my first movie. A couple days ago, I went to a movie for the first time in probably 2 or 3 years, I think before COVID. And I went alone. I love going to movies alone. And it was such a great experience. Now, it cost me like $50 after the ticket and food and drinks, because when I was there, I'm like, you know what? I'm here. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
But the experience was so great because there's something about being in a theater with other people watching the same thing, and you turn off your phone and you're just like, you go to another world for a little bit. Where when you're at home sitting on your couch, you can kind of go to another world, but you're not really in another world. Like, you are, you're getting interrupted, but there's stuff to do. You're thinking about things you got to do around the house or whatever. But I do think there's something special about that experience. So anyways, we kind of got off topic here, but I'm glad that you are heading up the Loop Gospel division. Let's just talk about, like, I think it's awesome. I think you're going to be such a great fit, and the people in our gospel community are going to love you the more they get to know you. What are you excited about for Loop Gospel? Like, what about it kind of just like fires you up? What gives you passion behind it?
Yeah, it's interesting as you and I were talking, and one of the things, one of the words that I was confused about was the word vocation versus occupation. So as an occupation, we're doing stuff with Loop Community, but my vocation is a calling. And I feel like God's called me to build, connect, and inspire. And so to be in an environment and to be in a company that does those two things, you're building a community, you're connecting people, and you're trying to inspire them, feels like that's why I was wired, what I was built for. I love being behind the scenes. I love connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And what I'm excited about is, again, that's why I'm not looking for an attaboy, but, to leave sometimes a record label where everything is just so glossy and, whatever. I had no problem with, not problem, but I was excited about going into the trenches to help churches grow. So I'm excited about what we can do in our community to build great music and great, environments where we're going to see people get inspired, start making better music, and then also connecting, because of our relationships in Nashville, to connect artists with in a meaningful way. Something like this, that have meaningful conversations with artists and record makers and content creators.
Right.
And just, that's what I'm excited about. So yeah, a few things in the works now. So
yeah, man, it's awesome. I think it's going to be really, really great. I think, I want to interview you another time where we're going to talk more about like tracks, and we're going to get a little bit more geeky and nerdy. Yes. I want to hear about like the history of tracks and like how you guys used to use them, how you're using them now as a producer. We just want to talk about tracks. But for now, how can people reach out to you if they want to meet you or like get to know you, or what's the best way for people to communicate with you?
Yeah, I'm online. Instagram is good, and obviously on all
Cool.
our channels, I would say for me personally, just Otto at Instagram or Twitter is great. But I would ask you, Matt, email or what's the best way for if they want to?
Yeah, email, social media, Loop Gospel,
Yeah,
the Loop Gospel
yeah,
group on Facebook. Make sure you're in
yep,
that. Also, all of our producers, you guys are in a Slack channel. Communicate that way.
yep,
So, anyways,
yep,
I'm just
right,
excited for everybody to get to know you, and
yep,
I think it's awesome, man. It's going to be great to have you on board. So,
yeah.
thanks for the time for giving us just a little bit of a history background, and we're going to send this video out to all the producers as well, so they can get to know you, and
I love it.
many good things to come.
I love it. And the last thing I would say is I'm always there's. My wife jokes about. I always say two things. One quick thing. I used to hear this thing that thought it was a clever quip for mediocrity, but it said "Jack of all trades, master of none." But the quote was Ben Franklin said, "Be a jack of all trades, but master one." So I always want to learn. I always want to grow. So if anybody has ideas and tips, I want to be able to grow for what you're doing. And the second thing is that if there are specific needs, songs, things that we can do to serve you,
Yeah.
I'm always available. So,
Hey, you cut out right as you were saying that quote. I want you to say it again because I want to hear it. Jack of all trades, master of
yeah,
none. But what was the second part?
the actual quote is Ben Franklin. He said, "Be a jack of all trades, but master one."
But master one.
One, yeah, yeah. So the idea is be super aware of a lot of things, but
Yeah.
be a specialist in one thing. And so I
Yeah.
feel,
Yeah.
I wanna be really super aware of a lot of things, but when it comes to
Yeah.
record making, I understand that really well. But if there's other areas I can grow in, I want to do that.
So that quote has been misquoted for this. That's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's Ben Franklin.
Yeah, that's good, man. Well,
And once
thanks
you
for taking
realize it
the.
like that, it goes, oh, he was saying, yeah, be a jack of all trades, but master one. He's like, be super aware of a lot of things, but really
Yeah.
be a special in one thing. It's like, oh,
Yeah. That is really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
yeah.
Bro, thanks for taking the time. And we're going to hear from you a lot more in the future. You guys are going to be seeing Otto interviewing artists, interviewing songwriters, interviewing producers. So you're going to be seeing Otto a lot more around the Loop community world. Glad you're here, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, brother.
All right, man. See you soon. All right, you guys. Otto Price, new director of Loop Gospel. Thanks so much for joining us on this Loop Live. If you have not already, make sure you hit the subscribe and like or follow buttons wherever you're watching these videos. Make sure you go follow Loop Gospel on Instagram. It's just Loop Gospel if you search for it. It's also on Facebook. We have a Facebook group for Loop Gospel and a page for Loop Gospel. Make sure you follow those just because we're going to be pumping out a ton of new content in the Loop community gospel world very soon, and Otto's going to be doing all that. So Otto, really, really glad to have you on board. It's going to be a great journey together. All right, you guys, stay tuned for the next Loop Live. We'll see you soon. Thanks for being part of the community. This is Matt. Thanks for listening. Hey, let us know what's the main thing you learned from today's talk. Write it down in the comments. Send us a DM. We hope to hear from you soon.